Well, welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming. This is our first installment for the spring semester of the American Cause. The American Cause is funded by the James Madison Institute in Tallahassee, Florida. We have one of the important people from the foundation, Francisco Gonzalez, in attendance. Francisco, did you want to say anything about the Institute or take a minute or so?
No, just thank you for coming, and you want to come up there?
Sure.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, thanks for coming. The James Madison Institute, we're a public policy organization focused primarily on the public policy of Florida, and we are headquartered in Tallahassee to do work all around the state. In addition to the work we do on policy, we help sponsor some civic education events around the state to help young people learn more about our nation's founding principles, and this is part of that program. Much of our civic education programs are actually focused on high school students, where we provide curriculum through the public schools, and we do different events around the state as well for high school students. And so this particular program is a unique one in our seminar, where we just help a great professor like Marshall DeRosa here at FAU conduct a program like this, and we're really lucky and fortunate tonight to have Dr. Walid Phares, and I know Marshall will introduce him in a bit, to have him down, because he's just a great scholar, so hopefully he'll help us learn a little bit more about sort of the threats to the American principles abroad and around the world as well. And just wanted to thank you all for coming here. If you need any more info on the James Madison Institute, you can always visit our website at jamesmadison.org, and we'll be putting this video up on our website in the coming weeks as well as we get the recording. So thanks so much for coming, and if you have any questions for me, feel free to visit with me after the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. The American Cause is, as Francisco pointed out, part of a civics education program. And civics education is a problem in America. We all know that because of the various reports. Not too many people know about America and the founding principles. And this is especially the case when it comes to Americans' role as a major player in foreign policy. You can see the book, The American Cause. It was written by a scholar, professor in the 1950s, Russell Kirk, and he was commissioned by the U.S. government to write this book because the veterans fighting in the Korean War had not a clue, based upon studies that the Defense Department had done, as to what those principles are and why they were in Korea and why it was important for America to play a role in foreign policy and foreign affairs. Let me read you something from, just very briefly, to give you an idea of Russell Kirk's perspective. He wrote, "So this book is not written to convert Americans into political fanatics zealous for a vague Americanism to be extended over the whole world. Nor is this book written as a piece of propaganda to persuade other peoples that everything America is perfect. One of the most important and beneficial aspects of our American tradition, indeed, is toleration. And this toleration extends to a sympathetic approval of variety, national and private rights, and freedom of choice, both at home and throughout the world. The American mission is not to make all the world one America, but rather to maintain America as a fortress of principle and, in some respects, an example to other nations. The American cause is not to stamp out of existence all rivals, but simply to keep alive the principles and institutions which have made the American nation great." So in other words, Russell Kirk is trying to tell veterans from the Korean War, and even veterans today and Americans today, that America is unique, that there is something exceptional about America, but not to the point that we impose our values on other nations, but to the point that in our own interest, we serve as a beacon to other nations that they can choose to follow or not to follow. Now, with that said, Dr. Walid Phares is our guest speaker this evening. We're very fortunate to have him available here tonight. And his talk is America's Image in the Middle East After the Arab Spring. And we know that there's a lot happening in the Middle East. Just driving to campus today, whether it's NPR or the cable news, whatever the case might be, there's something happening in the Middle East. And America is trying to sort out its role. And there's a lot of division and divisiveness regarding, in domestic and foreign politics, what that role should be. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Phares. Dr. Phares was a professor of political science and Middle East studies at FAU between 1993 and 2006. It was a great loss to FAU when Dr. Phares decided to go elsewhere, because he is a force in academia and in policy. He is now teaching at the National Defense University in Washington. He's advisor to the U.S. Congress and the European Parliament. He appears on Fox News, NBC, CNN, C-SPAN, Russian TV, France TV, BBC, and Arab media of Al Jazeera and many radio stations. He published 12 books, including the most recent, The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East, and predicted the Arab Spring. Now this is a gentleman, political scientists aren't very good in predicting things. We failed to predict the fall and demise of the Soviet Union, at least most political scientists, but you have in front of you a political scientist that is in fact a scientist. He has predictive capabilities, and before many others in academia or in politics had an inkling what was happening in the Middle East, Dr. Phares was writing about it. So what you're seeing happening now, he anticipated, if not predicted, these events. And by the way, his book, The Coming Revolution, is available outside. I know many of you have purchased it so far, and Dr. Phares will sign your copy of the book this evening after his presentation. So, without further ado, it's my great pleasure and honor, Walid, to introduce you and present this podium to you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Thank you for coming tonight. I know many among you are here because you're part of classrooms. That's what I used to do for students to get good grades. But I'm very happy that I'm back on campus. This is very dear to me. I told my colleague, Robert Rabil, professor of many among you, that when I walk in the alleys here, I feel back at home in my village. But oh boy, it grew so much. FAU is really amazing. I would like to thank Dr. DeRosa for his introduction and for actually inviting me and making it easy for me to come and address you or actually interact with you. I'd like to thank the organization as well that has sponsored this. We really need more and more of these organizations with educational goals, because with education actually we can make better decisions. Decisions could be in different directions, but they better be informed. And that's why I've dedicated many of my previous years, before I moved to Washington in 2004, many years to teaching. I taught at FAU as of 1993, just to give you an idea. Social Science Building, 3rd floor. I began by teaching Introduction to World Politics, then Comparative Politics and International Relations. Then I expanded with a number of courses that are being taught still, one of which is Middle Eastern Studies or Middle East Conflicts. But also we covered, I launched the course that became now a known course here. Some among you are supposed to be taking it tonight, Religion and World Politics, and also the ethnic conflict, comparative politics of ethnic conflict. I enjoyed very much teaching. I met many of brilliant students here, some of whom I met again in Washington, New York, and other places, well placed. So FAU doesn't have only professors who end up in Washington, but also students across the board, and also international students. One of the things that I've enjoyed doing here, which ended up helping me in actually not just publishing the book that Marshall was talking about, but my advising to government, to Congress in the United States, many agencies, departments, and also to the European Parliament. And I was privileged between 2003 and 2006 to advise the Security Council of the United Nations on issues pertaining to the Levant, so Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Iraq, and so on and so forth. But all of that began somewhere here at FAU when we launched in 1994 a small student group called Haiti Watch. There were a lot of problems and persecutions and suppression going on in Haiti. So we were among the first ones to draw the attention of national media. Some of our students were the first ones to land in Haiti with the precursors of what became the initiative. And after that, we paid attention to another massive abuse of human rights in another continent, in Africa, in Sudan. It was an ongoing genocide, and that was way before Darfur. So we created another student group funded by the student government, titled or called Slavery Watch, because there was slavery going on in Sudan, between the north and the south, and in Mauritania. And then we developed other associations, Middle Eastern Studies, Latin American Studies, and at the end, towards 1998, 99, we launched the then Human Rights Association. That Human Rights Association invited to campus, as you're doing right now, a number of speakers. Among those speakers, many who ended up becoming good players in the human rights field. In Washington, in New York, with the various human rights organizations, and in Europe as well. Those years that came before 9/11 and a few years after 9/11 were extremely informative, because we were among the very few on this campus and some other places who saw, because we were focusing on the realities on the ground, who saw that changes are coming. And those changes were coming in various places, in various continents, but specifically in what I call now in my book, my recent book, Middle Earth. The Lord of the Rings ended up with a big battle in Middle Earth. So I baptized the Middle East Middle Earth. And I use a lot of references to the Lord of the Rings and Star Wars in my books. That concept basically tells us that if you observe for a number of years evolution on the ground, not just based on, I may say, just what mainstream media is reporting, because mainstream media reports based on the research of mainstream academia. That's how it happens. It's a cycle. So if there's something wrong in the classroom, if there's something not really producing the ideas, and Marshall mentioned prediction, I would be more modest. I would say projection. What I do is projection based on the observation of events, the observation of what is tangent to the mainstream. Because the tangent to the mainstream is the precursor to changes, revolts, revolutions, and then new waves of policies. Over the years that preceded 9/11, we focused on two things happening in the Middle East. And I may say, open a small bracket, that I, as somebody who was born and raised overseas, I'm an immigrant obviously, Beirut, Lebanon, was a publisher, was a lawyer for many years, and then I relocated, I immigrated in 1990, so that's my 22nd year as an American. I could see how those events were read in homeland or fatherland, and then how those events were read after I immigrated in the chosen land, in the adopted land. Very different. That's why my excitement was about comparative politics. You are comparing how multiple views are looking at the same phenomenon from different angles, different perspectives. Of course, when you are from one region, you expect that everybody else knows everything about that region. That's not true. It's a learning process. And I always mention this example that became legend in South Florida about my own experience when I had finished my PhD at the University of Miami in 1992. It was a very fast one. And I was assigned a class at Florida International University. My first adjuncting was there. It was my first time I teach in America. And coming from the region, you're impressed. This is a superpower. Therefore, we assume that every citizen knows everything in that row, superpower. So I was asked to teach a course in Middle Eastern Studies. I walked into the classroom, like this one, Miami, and I asked the students to kick off the discussion. So I said, where's the Middle East? Assuming that somebody's going to tell me where, and we begin immediately talking about the conflicts, the issues. So a young man stood up and said, oh, the Middle East is the other side of the Middle West. So I realized that I'm going to have a job for a long time teaching Middle Eastern. I would have done probably the same thing had I been the student and the professor was talking about China, because I'm not expert on China or Far Asia. The experiment I had here, to close on that point, helped me in shaping up an understanding and a briefing that I presented to members of the US Congress as of the mid-1990s while I was a professor here. Because we were observing two things happening in the region. Two things that have to do with American foreign policy, but also have to do with the the region's own policies and conflicts. When I showed up in America 22 years ago, and I was watching CNN, flipping channels, didn't have that luxury in Beirut and other places, so many channels. Every time CNN flashed the title Middle East Crisis, I would think that they're going to be talking about every crisis in the Middle East. There was a genocide going on in Sudan. There were the Kurds being gassed by Saddam Hussein. There are the issues of women across the region. There were the issues of, let's say, Syria and Lebanon that now we see 20 years later. On and on. But every time CNN and others flashed that one title, Middle East Crisis, it meant one thing, the Arab-Israeli conflict, which obviously is a central conflict in the Middle East, there's no doubt about it. But that is not the only conflict. And what happened in 2011 and continued to happen now in the Middle East is just an evidence that what we have been concentrating on for so many years without paying attention to the rest of the environment. Actually, the Arab-Israeli conflict today depends on the resolution of the other conflicts, of the other uprisings, of the other revolutions that would make or break the solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Unlike what many of my colleagues thought in the 90s, that you solve that one, and basically everything else would look like Sweden or New Zealand. It's the other way around. It's not been solved because of the level of oppression and suppression of terrorism and dictatorship and suppression of minorities across the region that froze the Middle East under, it was like the Middle East was taken as a hostage. You solve that problem and everything else we can discuss. But then the radical forces will make sure that this problem is not going to be solved, so nothing else will be solved. We discovered the trick by looking at two things, as I said. One is the rise of radical ideological forces, the same ones that basically the United States had to face off with after 9/11. The ones we call the jihadists, on the one hand. But then, on the other hand, while looking at the region, we discovered little by little that there were dramas going on. And the biggest one that here at FAU and later on nationwide we've discovered was Sudan. What was happening in Sudan? The genocide, I mean, the term genocide is so heavy. Last time we've heard of genocide were the Armenian genocide and the Jewish Holocaust and the Khmer Rouge genocide and other genocides. This is very heavy. We're talking about 1.5 million Africans who have been decimated over 20, 25 years. And that was before Darfur. We know now more of Darfur because of Hollywood. So it's colorful, there are documentaries, there are movies, but the Southern Sudanese have suffered before they obtained their independence finally last January of last year. And again, all the other crises of democratic struggle and suppression of these democratic struggles were going on. So when I came to my publisher in the summer of 2010, and I told them, well, this is the manuscript, and the title of the book is going to be The Coming Revolution. He said, Dr. Phares, are you sure? It was July 4th, as you can see here in the preface, July 4th, 2010. And there were no indications in academia. That's why Marshall mentioned the issue of, you could be an academic, you are a good scholar, but if you are in social science, especially in the field of comparative politics, you've got to have the ability of reading events and reading the evolutions of these events. And I don't think that the term prediction is the one that we should use, although in the media we use it all the time. It's projection. You project trends. Of course, I did not predict that on, January the 13th at 5 p.m. students are going to rush to Tahrir Square. That's not what I do. But that a critical level of tolerance by civil societies in the Arab world has been reached and will break through is something that one can project. And you can project by reading what's happening in the region elsewhere. You're going to look at it as a map and forces moving in different directions. Then you use some of not just social science, but exact science, statistical and comparative, analytical, and then you start seeing those moving. It is practically impossible that the moves that we saw as of last year, the so-called, and I call it so-called Arab Spring, were born overnight. Democratic movements or movements that wants to create democratic change have years and years behind them. And I had the same reasoning while dealing with my previous books that dealt with the rise of the Salafist and the Khomeini's jihadist movements, such as Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the Shabab. I was focusing on the terror networks first, and then I started to focus on the democracy networks, two contradictive forces. Many in America before, after 9/11 and before the Arab Spring, had a hard time understanding how a suicide bomber would come to exist. Many of my good friends in Washington and in Europe, who are brilliant social scientists and psychologists, focused on different parts of it, but not on the center, meaning you don't become a suicide bomber overnight. You don't become somebody who want to blow up yourself and others just because you didn't find the right job, or you had a divorce in the family. These are pressure points that apply, but they apply for something else. You could actually express your anger and crisis in other ways and means, but there is a link that is basically political culture that would legitimize, allow you, and incite, and let you move in that direction. So, should it be for terrorism or for democracy building, although these are contradictive forces, there's always a history to those movements, and that's what I tried to do. The United States were involved in both, and that's the essence of tonight's talk. We were involved certainly as a reaction to 9/11. No need for historians, we lived it, all of us. In reaction to 9/11, we engaged in Afghanistan. It became a war. It started as an operation, it became a war. But then something else came out of it, which is once the Taliban were down after Tora Bora in December of 2001, what's the alternative? While we focused mostly on the military operations, surge, non-surge, counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, all these great discussions in the defense realm, national security realm, we sort of forgot another important realm, which is the war of ideas, which is basically which kind of society is going to be replacing the society that was under the Taliban. Because mathematically speaking, if you move in, remove a regime, and don't help in the creation of a political change, when you go out, what do you expect to happen? What happened before will come back. You don't need to be political scientists. This is very simple. And that's what we are facing today, 12 years after, or 11 years after. Same thing happened in Iraq, without going into the discussion of basically the decision to go to Iraq. But Saddam Hussein regime went down, and we had policy of surges and engagement, variety of communities, because Iraq is a multi-ethnic place. And same question goes back now after the withdrawal. What kind of society is left behind? Excuse me. So, in the debate that followed 9/11, from an American perspective, and then I'll go to the Middle Eastern perspective, the issue was, did we do the right thing, and how do people perceive America in the region and worldwide? And so we entered, not just in terms of public opinion, but in terms of government. I've advised many of those departments and agencies and structures of government that deals with strategic communications, meaning broadcasts, democracy agencies. This is a world that we are funding. You and I are spending money. I don't know if you know that, but we are spending a lot of money on institutions, American, US institutions, and of course the Europeans are doing something very similar in trying to, we used to call it promote democracy or spread democracy. That word is not used. Or now partner with. The new word is we are partnering with forces that want democracy or political change. And it's very ironic that when I was assigned tonight's talk, it was before an event, a series of incidents that took place in Egypt that are today news. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, number of democracy agencies, US-funded democracy agencies in Egypt were raided. And 10 days ago, a week later, 19 Americans who are workers in these NGOs, including the head of one of these NGOs, the IRI, Sam LaHood, who's the son of our Secretary of Transportation in the Obama administration, Ray LaHood, were banned from traveling and now are going to be prosecuted. So we're not just talking about theory, we're talking about policy and reality. Because that is happening at a time where politics are developing and changing in Egypt. The Egypt of today is different from the Egypt of even last year, beginning of last year. and way different from under Mubarak, and of course different from the beginning of the century. So my point is that you have in play certainly efforts by the United States government, Congress, administration, various ones, and NGOs to project an image that the United States is interested in promoting freedom and democracy, but the way those people want it, obviously. We all know we don't want to, and we are not in the business of repeating the same experiment of America elsewhere. It's impossible. Nobody can repeat their own experiments anywhere around the world. Not the French, not the Russians who tried in Afghanistan, and not the other way around. The Iranian regime is not going to repeat their experiment in London or in Iceland. So basically, the question has been, were we doing the right thing? Were we responsible for the Arab Spring? Is the Arab Spring basically a response to our policy, or do they have a policy of their own? See, you can't answer that in a remaining 35 minutes. But I'm going to try to do my best based on the book that I've published, and then I'll be very happy to engage with you in Q&A in summarizing why there wasn't an Arab Spring, where are we as Americans in this Arab Spring, and what can we project into the future. Knowing that it's very difficult for social scientists, and you are all, I assume, social scientists, to determine a final view or analysis on issues while they are moving. One thing for historians to study World War II, you have it from 39 to 45. Another thing is if you are a historian studying the Cold War between 47, I guess, and 1990. And an absolutely different thing if you are in the middle of the Arab Spring, which is now, and try to determine the projection. So you understand if I overgeneralize or overlook issues, it's because we are in the midst of it. So I'll do my best to summarize what led to it from what we know. Because future social scientists, and we as well, a few years from now, we can have probably a different look at it and determine the answers to the questions I've asked, U.S. role versus genuine happening or native happenings in the Middle East. The Arab Spring, as I argue in the book, The Coming Revolution, which now I have to change the title, of course, for my next book, Revolution Came Already. I'm not sure if it failed or not, but we'll see. You have long-term historical roots, and then you have very short roots, and then you have how it did happen, actually. Most revolutions, by way of comparison, happen after the collapse of empires. Very centralized, large empires, including the American Revolution. It was against an empire. And the Bolshevik Revolution that began by being social democratic and then taken over by the Bolsheviks. French Revolution, all these revolutions. There was one empire in the Middle East which collapse has caused tremendous changes, and those changes continue. They're stretching for over a century, and that empire was the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire. Collapsed in 1919, finalized in 1925. So after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which was also, as you know, for those who studied those issues, was also known as the Caliphate. But its technical name was the Sultanate. The Caliphate stretched over 1,200 years, the Sultanate over 400 years. It was the Ottoman Empire. At the peak of the Ottoman Empire, it was between Morocco and Persia or Iran. But then by the time World War I had begun, the Ottoman Empire was smaller in size. The bottom line is, when that Ottoman Empire collapsed, the question was, why didn't the societies that formed the Ottoman Empire move steadily into the direction of democracies or into the direction of civil societies, secular civil societies? Well, because major events occurred in the 20th century that obstructed that from happening. And I'm mentioning this, ladies and gentlemen, because some of the debates and discussions and the choices that many of those who are players in the Arab Spring goes back to the end of the Ottoman Empire. People were not satisfied with how the post-Ottoman Empire happened. When you have ethnic minorities saying, I want to be independent, I want to have my own state, the Kurds want to have their own state, the Shia their own state, and all these ethnic nationalities wants to secede or form their own homelands, it's because something went wrong at the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. You have a couple things happening. Number one, the euro mandates, French and British, took over part of the Middle East, so colonials. Second, we have the rise of regimes in the Middle East. The same regimes, or the same pattern regimes, that are now being brought down since last year, rose as elites as a result of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. So when the Ottomans collapsed, you didn't have basically civil societies rising. That was missed. And I call it in my book the missed century. A whole century was missed. If you compare with Latin America, you would see that after colonial Spain and Portugal withdrew, it took two stages for those who are familiar with that. It took the first stage of trying to establish national boundaries, and then it took the second stage of acceleration of modernization. And in that second stage, it was very long. You had back and forth between multi-party systems and then authoritarian regimes and military regimes and communist regimes until it's somewhat trying to settle nowadays. That was missed in the Middle East. Middle East is behind, about 75 to 80 years behind. Because what came after the Ottoman Empire was a stretch of authoritarian regimes, but not as empire. Third challenge after colonialism and those regimes was the rise of totalitarian ideologies, fundamentalism, for example. Those fundamentalists, whom we call today Salafists or Khomeinists, they want to go back to the empire. They want to actually re-establish their own form of caliphate. And that struggle was across the board in the Arab world between the seculars, progressive liberals, who wanted to go forward, and those who wanted to go back to the empire. In a nutshell, that was the long-term preparing field for the Arab Spring. Then came the collapse of the Soviet Union in the region, and the perpetuation of these authoritarian regimes, and the Arab-Israeli conflict, of course. The fact that it was not addressed, not solved, it kept a political pressure that is one of frustration. And the regimes were very happy that this was not solved, because they were mobilizing on the ground that we all need to look at the Arab-Israeli conflict, but not at our countries and our democracies. So came the post-9/11 era. And here I'm going to hit straight the factors that led to the Arab Spring. The Taliban regime collapsed. What came to replace it is mediocre. This is not liberal democracy, this is not even, this is quasi, it's limping democracy. But that's not the Taliban. So what we miss from the debate is that there is a parliament, a very shaky parliament. There are more women in that parliament than ever before, because there were no more women in the parliament in Afghanistan. The Taliban may come back, by the way, I mean, we know that. If we don't equip the government of Afghanistan to defend itself in civil society, there is no doubt about it. The Taliban will be back. So I'm not discussing the final outcome. I'm discussing this one little opening, whereby for 5-6 years, there was something different. And there were debates in that parliament. And it went online. Now keep adding up with me the online, the globalization, the technologies. Then Iraq. Saddam was gone. We did an invasion of Iraq. There was a resistance against that invasion. But putting those two things on the side, and the Iranians and the Syrians, there was a parliament. And in that parliament, which was, it continued to be very mediocre and controlled halfway by the militias, and then you had the Kurds and the Shia and the Sunni, there was something unseen before, which is multiple opinions. You should have seen the parliament of Saddam Hussein, one opinion. They all look the same, all the same mustaches, same people, same, zombies. Something has changed. Still, violent and throwing shoes at each other. It's like the Israeli Knesset. I mean, they throw bad words at each other, but there's the democratic game accepted. So these two changes sent into the Middle East the idea that, yeah, we can oppose each other. Now, why was that disseminated? It's because there was a dissemination tool. Had those changes occurred some 40 years ago or 30 years ago, we wouldn't have heard of them. And you know what I mean. It's because of internet. It's because of the bloggers. It's because of the various media, social media, Facebook, YouTube, extremely important. Now came two other events that prepared for the Arab Spring directly. 2005, there was a huge demonstration in Beirut. It was called the Cedars Revolution. For the first time in 30 years, 1.5 million Lebanese with non-violent means demonstrated in downtown Beirut and called for the withdrawal of the Syrian army and for the disarming all militias. Now, that revolution was known as the SMS revolution. They were able to gather in 2005 that huge number of people. Lebanon is 4 million. So when 1.5 million take to the streets, it's huge. The goal of that demonstration was to assemble in one place so many people that no security service can arrest. You can't technically arrest 1.5 million people. This provoked basically what occurred later, which is the withdrawal of the Syrian army, not the disarming of the militias. But it sent a strong message to many in the Arab world, especially the youth, who started to see that, wow, we can actually have different opinions. We don't have to look and be the same. Two, we can actually provoke a change without actual war by taking to the street in one time. That's an organization. Then 4 years later, you remember, June of 2009, another 2 million Iranians this time. 60% under the age of 19, 20 and 19. 40% of those females, including very young, never seen before in Iran. One of them became a symbol, Neda, the girl was shot, killed. Now, the Green Revolution in Iran may have failed technically, but it sent another message that even under most repressive regimes, one can, express their own opinion. With those 4 or 5 events, you add the interaction of all social media, you have your Arab Spring to begin. It started in Tunisia, then it moved to Egypt. So let's look at the first developments of the Arab Spring. Now we are studying it with more information. Now that happened after I've published my book, because the book was published in 10, what I'm talking about now happened in 11, based on some of the projections. First days of the Egyptian Revolution, and nothing was written, by the way, about it so far, in terms of books. Next year I'll write mine. In the first business days of the Egyptian Revolution, who were the promoters? Facebook people. I saw the first Facebook on the Egyptian Revolution at home. Desk, and I saw Facebook. It began with 500, and a few hours later there were thousands. Egypt is 80 million. There were thousands. In 72 hours, 85,000 I like. Now that is a revolution in the Arab world. Why? Because in the Arab world, with those regimes, you don't do I like and show your face. Give your email, what you like, what you don't like, what you dislike. That is not Middle East at all. But they actually, the Egyptian Google, Facebook people, chose the model of Beirut and Tehran. Meaning, if you hit the regime with those huge numbers, they cannot arrest 85,000 people. They don't have the capacity of going, and doing it. So the more faces you put, you are disorienting those. Second, there's a second important effect. Other people in society felt, that if 85,000 people showed their face, we will show our face as well. That's why the first tens of thousands of Egyptians who hit Tahrir Square, if you recall, this is from public information, where middle class, lower class, labor union, women, students, Coptic minorities, Christians of Egypt, all sorts of people. So that was civil society for the first time in the Arab world. The political parties, the old political parties, the Wafd party, the Communist party, the Muslim Brotherhood party, all of these stayed behind because these are the professionals. They have been in the business of trying to uprise for the previous 5 decades, and they failed. So when they saw that civil society, non-organized, no political party, no petrodollars, no satellite TV, were able to get to Tahrir Square and get to almost 500,000, then they watched what the international community has done. And here is the point. When we saw in the free world, internationally, that these were really civil society people, and we have basically missed the train in Tehran in 2009. We could have done way more. I will be happy to discuss that. Then we said, Mubarak, you're not gonna crush that revolt. And this was the key. Because had we not basically extended that red line over the heads of Tahrir Square, you would have projected what would have happened, usually in those circumstances. You would have rolled the tanks, and there would have been a couple hundred people killed, and Tiananmen Square, a la Egypt, and it's done. So the massive influx of people who acted as real democratic elements on the ground without the use of violence. And look at their signs and what they have displayed, very unprofessional in the beginning. And colors and coloring their face, you know, the whole party-like situation in the beginning. That prompted an international response. This is civil society. This is looking like post-Soviet Europe revolution, so we'll protect. The Egyptian army at that time said, okay, we're not going to repress it. And the Egyptian army became the actual organization that transferred power from Mubarak to the current government. Meanwhile, this was not the end of it, and I want to spend one more minute because it's going to be the same for all other cases. When democratic forces, especially youth, are successful in the first push, and they don't have the funding, they don't have the organization, they don't have the time to do these organizations, what happens is that those who are most organized, who have been there for a long time, older, more mature, will take over. In every single revolution that we've seen over the past 200 years, or at least 150 years, it has almost been the same. There's a trigger, there's a push, there's a younger element that goes in, and then the professionals will come in, and then if they are better prepared, if they are not taken out by the regime earlier, then there will be the next regime. Menshevik, Bolshevik, Iran Revolution. 80% of the original 1979 Iran Revolution was done not by the Khomeinist people at all. It was done by students, it was done by the bazaar, and each revolution, of course, is different. So what happened in Egypt, and that's why we have a lot of incidents today, is that the professionals, the political parties, led by mostly the Ikhwan, or the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Salafists, took to the center stage, are the better organized, and proceeded in going fast in the electoral process. And see, this is something I'd like to have your opinion about. When you have a major change, and we move directly to the framework of election, what do you expect to happen? The most organized, the better funded, are going to be the one to carry those elections. Not the majority of civil society that wants different choices, because they don't have the tools. And here is our responsibility. If we as international community, when things like that happen, and it could be in Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere, we need to make sure to empower the weaker element of society, because the second stronger element of society will be the one to carry it, and then become the next regime, and we're going to go at it again in a few years from now. That model was repeated in Tunisia, and in different places in the Arab world, but it took different directions. And let me just take a couple cases and then conclude. In Libya, it began with civil society demonstrations. In Benghazi, in Tripoli, of course, and other places, in Misrata. Then in Libya, the leader is different, was different. Gaddafi was a very different person, you know what I mean. In the Arab world, we used to call him al-Magnoon, the crazy. The way he wore stuff, and we could go on forever. His speeches were not of this world. He ordered, Air Force strikes against demonstrators. You can't do this in the 21st. Air Force strikes against demonstrators. You can use police, some water, some more violence, but not the MiG-21 bombing the demonstrators. Then he broke all the red lines. Immediately, the international community said, Gaddafi should be out, including the Russians. The Russians should have been protecting Gaddafi as they're doing with Assad today. But he behaved so badly that the Russians say, okay. But in Libya, there were no political parties at all, as in Egypt. So those who actually won the game on the ground after the demonstrators were the best armed and organized, that is the militias. And the militias in Libya reflect a host of things. The eastern and western part, the southern part, the ethnic minorities, the tribes, and also the ideological Islamist and secular and socialist. So I don't want to do more prediction tonight, but Libya is not over. It's like the French Revolution. Those who studied the French Revolution, 1789, was just the beginning of a long series of very bloody revolutions, and until it's settled with the Third Republic, and still. So what we read now in the Arab Spring, we are excited about the fact that the major change has shifted, that we, in a sense, try to play the role of supporting the principles, as Marshall said, But reality is we need to conceive the idea of supporting also the forces of democracy and the forces of change, not just the principles. Otherwise, we will have to find ourselves in years from now, hopefully not decades, also trying to support one against the other in the next series of revolution. Syria is the actual most difficult one because it's not about only internal situation. And I'm talking about Syria, and I know when you're going to go out back to your rooms or to your houses, apartments, you're going to see Syria on the news. It's getting very bloody, and it's unfortunate that I'm making this statement. I don't see any solution to it. Why? Because Assad learned from Gaddafi. That's why he did not send his air force, did he? He did not send the air force against the demonstrators. He's sending everything below the air force because he knows that will provoke an international reaction. But in Syria, geopolitics, for those among you who are lovers of geography and history, geopolitics are very important. Syria is not as isolated as Libya. Libya is surrounded by 3 deserts and waters. Syria is surrounded by many players and has a lot of allies. The regime is not as isolated as Gaddafi. First ally of Syria is Iran. Second ally of Syria is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Third ally of Syria is now, after we withdrew from Iran. See, every move has a price with a counter move. Because now Iraq has a significant influence by the Iranians, so you could have an I-95 from Tehran to Baghdad to Damascus, unaffected by anything. So the Iranians can support Assad through southern Iraq, at least into Syria. So the price today for the United States or the international community to do more than what we're doing in terms of going to the UN, being blocked by the Russians, going to the Turks and the Qataris and the Arabs, and they tell us, why don't you begin? And we tell them, why don't you begin? That's what's happening in reality. And nobody wants to be the first one to fight against the Syrian regime, because behind the Syrian regime there's a big regime, the Iranian regime. And I could expand on that, but time is of essence. So Syria's situation is more of a geopolitical situation, but I still project a couple little things I'll leave you with. Number one, by all measurement that we can have, Assad is not going back to where he was last year. Right? We have an argument, it's impossible. After all these killings and massacres, he is not going to be able to go back to stabilize Syria as before, and he knows it. So he's trying to gain as much time as he can to survive on vitamins and shots, shooting people. The opposition is growing, is spreading, but it's unable so far to bring down that regime by force without international help. So I'm just giving you the components of a mathematical problem. The regime is not going back, can't finish off. The opposition is not going back and can't finish off. The sad conclusion of that is, if we don't have international intervention to help one or the other, it's going to continue. And it's always difficult for me when I'm on international network and ask, why do you think the Syrian issue is going to end? I say sadly, I don't know. It's an open-ended one. Unless some of the big players is going to do something about it, it's going to continue to be in the same direction. Demonstrations, bloodshed, rebels, army suppression, etc. And why? It's simple. Turkey, that is the only country that has the material to move in, has a government, the AKP, that doesn't want to risk too much. If they move into Syria, 3 of their borders are going to be hit by Syrian, Iraqi, and the Iranians and Hezbollah. So Jordan would not do it. If we want to do it, now let's go to the we. First of all, the administration here, and that's not a secret, is already part of the next cycle of elections. And so is the opposition, the campaigns. I'm not expert on domestic affairs, but it's very difficult in an election year, presidential election year, with all the political tensions that we have here, that somebody's going to give an order to send significant forces at a time we are bringing those forces home. It's going to be very difficult to convince the American public, the US Congress, right? I mean, we're out of Iraq by last December. We are now talking to, I don't know who in Afghanistan, to maybe we're going to be out, in a couple of years from there. It will be psychologically very difficult to do other than what we've done in Libya, meaning Air Force. But even that, if we do a Libya, aircraft intervention, and then others on the ground would move in, there are nobody on the ground to intervene. That's different from that. So in Syria, it's going to take the following. Either inside Syria, more insurgents are going to be joining the rebels of the army to create a Benghazi-like situation that would create inside Syria an area where the international community can help and can pour in support, then yes, between now and the next month, this could happen, this could lead to intervention. If that doesn't happen, we're going to see the same thing. Or, and that's a big, big if Washington thinks that it can do Syria in and out, very quick, with guaranteed success before November. And that, I don't know if any architect can guarantee that. Because we're not going to, nobody in Washington is going to do it before November, and in November we're going to be in Syria while we have elections at home. Again, the political scientists here understand that point. So, having said that, let me go to rosier images to conclude. The Arab Spring has begun. It's going to go into cycles, very difficult cycles. Reasons to be pessimistic are the fact that it's going to take a much longer time than in Eastern and Central Europe or in Latin America or in South Africa for that matter, because of history. Reason to be optimistic in a sense is the fact that the younger we look at in those societies, the more we see a uniform acceptance for change. And that is an exercise that you can do yourselves. People say, look, the religious fundamentalist forces are winning in Egypt, in Libya, and Tunisia. I agree. I say, well, calm down. Below them and under them, if you look at Facebook, at YouTube, at all these social media, the same ones that did the revolution, you see that this is going to be short-lived. But it's going to take a long struggle by civil society to assert, at the end of the day, pluralism, meaning equality for everybody to express themselves. In this game, the United States must be, first of all, committed to the principles of the values that were mentioned in the beginning of the lecture, democracy, pluralism, and human rights. And on the other hand, know where the threat is coming from and know where the friends are in the Middle East. And one of the criticism I leveled over the past few weeks to our debate in America is, don't be over-optimistic. This is the Arab Spring. You're going to see Sweden's tomorrow in the Middle East. No, we're not going to see that. Or basically, the Islamists and the jihadists are all over. There is no hope. This region will never change. That is also another extreme. In that region, you have forces of hope and forces that are against that hope. Smart people in our decision-making process should be able to see, to understand, and to work with the forces of change. And to do so, they need to be updated and briefed. They need to have an academic elite and academia that is well educated, because from the classroom comes the people who are going to be serving as legislative assistants, as analysts, as writers, as bloggers, as New York Times or any conservative magazine or left-wing magazine. So the classroom is very important. That's why I really appreciate when we have the opportunity to educate and engage and discuss. So again, thank you so much for inviting me tonight, and I'll be very happy to answer your question. Thank you.
Walid, if you want to handle the Q&A, you could.
If you want to help,
okay,
yeah.
And since I'm helping, I'm going to ask the first question. How did the lack of U.S. response in 2009 regarding the Iranian, quote, uprising, how did that affect the Arab Spring generally? Did it sort of bring the United States down a notch? Did they expect it? Would you mind commenting on that?
Oh yes, that's a very important question. We've had a lot of briefings in Congress about it. Continue to deal with it. Let me also take advantage of your question to share with you what I think is sometimes a problem in making those decisions. Facts were that in June of 2009, as a result of botched elections, of course, in Iran, there were those millions of people, mostly young people, who took to the streets and said, where is our vote? And really what they wanted was to bring down the Ayatollah's regime and create a democracy. That's what they really wanted. And mostly youth. We haven't seen so many youth in Iran for the previous 30 years against the regime. They expected that the international community led by the United States would actually stand by them the same way we did with the Egyptians when they took to the streets, with the Libyans, with the Tunisians, and with the rest. Instead, Washington at the time said, we don't want to be seen as meddling in Iranian domestic affairs. That's the old school. That's the school that I remember in the 90s in our Middle Eastern studies, when experts used to tell us, if you do anything, basically, you're going to be seen as, and therefore everybody's going to turn against you. It turned out to be wrong. Because the Middle East is not a uniform place made of those, you know, same people with same mustaches. No. There are various people with various interests, with various forces, and we have to make a choice because it's our choice to actually have a foreign policy that expresses our views. What happened then is that most of the academic and scholarly advice that was given to the government, the US government, most of the administration at the time, said that this does not really, at the beginning of the revolt, this is not really representative of the entire Iranian population. Everybody loves the Ayatollahs and so on and so forth. So if you're gonna basically support them, it's gonna be the kiss of death to those demonstrators. They're gonna be seen as the anti-American. The reality is that the regime looked at them anyway as the enemy. And anyway, with or without us, told them you are pro-American, you're pro-Zionist, you're pro-everything, and crushed them. It was seen by the Iranian youth as an act of abandonment at the time. You know, why would you do that? But the Arab Spring saw in it an example that you should do more on the inside with your own means. Don't really rely completely on the West. And that's what prompted many, hundreds of thousands of people in Cairo or now in Syria or in Tunisia to take to the streets themselves and to see if the international community is going to help.
Okay? Yes, ma'am.
And what about Iran today? Now, not 2009. With the threats, with the nuclear, with the Israelis, with the United States, with the Arabs who want us and the Israelis to jump in and get rid of everything nuclear. What do you project is going to happen with Iran?
Is this the title of the next lecture you're invited to? This is huge. This is a seminar. Hope Dr. Rabil will take some of these questions in his classroom later. In a nutshell, let's make a distinction in Iran today between the issue of the nuclear so-called, weaponing system and everything else. Now, I always begin in my analysis by projecting that the Iranian regime is far ahead of us in the game, although we think we may be ahead of them, but that's what I have been seeing for the last many years. I've published a book on Iran in 1987 in Arabic in Beirut. Nobody read it because it was in Arabic, but projecting that the Iranians have a strategy for very long terms, not just reaction to policies. First of all, with regard to nukes, let me put in a nutshell what I think the equation is. The Iranians know very well that if they're going to produce the bomb, here's the bomb, what do you think the international community is going to do? They're going to go after the bomb. So they're not going to produce the bomb before, and I'm making it very easy for all of us. They produce the protection system to their bomb. So all the stuff that they're doing in Natanz and all these other places to actually increase the nuclear capacity, in my sense, that's my own opinion, and probably alone in Washington, is only a back burner. The real front burner is not the bomb. What is the front burner?
Myself.
Yes, sir. My dear colleague, I wrote an article which was a briefing to Congress in 2007, and I titled it, "It's the missiles, not the fissile." Because we're focusing on the production of the fissile, and they can control that. They show us a little bit more, we start to scream and sanction and sanction and sanction, and then they say, okay, we're going to go to negotiations, and we are very happy. And then they, okay, on the one hand, on the other hand, they are, free range in developing those middle range, long range, ICBM missiles that they can cover everywhere they want, all the way to London and Moscow and Khyber Pass. This is the circle of what. Of course, Israel is part of it a long time ago. So if they have the long range missiles in large quantities, if they have something else, I'm going to push one more inch with you tonight. Not just the missiles, the launching pads. Where you're going to display and base those missiles is as important as the missiles. One thing, if you have them in Iran alone. I know you play those computer games like my son does all the time. He's better than many analysts in Washington because we've established the base, the map, and we look. One thing if those missiles are placed in Iran, you have one circle. But then if you can place them in next door Iraq, you gain 200-300 miles. If you place them in Syria, another 600 miles. If you place them on the Mount Lebanon range, you are dealing with Italy and Spain. So there's some intelligence, a strategic intelligence, whereby the Iranians are widening the emplacement of the missiles while we are focusing on Natanz, what's been produced there, etc. Better than that, Iranians have now acquired facilities for their navies, meaning small submarines and other stuff, fine. In Eritrea, in the Red Sea, we are concerned about the Hormuz Strait. They are already in the Red Sea. Northern Yemen uprising has Iranian support. You want better than that? They have a strategic alliance with Hugo Chavez regime here. Now, I'm in the business of projection, not just looking at the fact and just observing the fact, trying to see the projection of that fact. The Iranian regime will display its weapon when it is sure that by displaying it on missiles in various places, we don't have the capacity, or the risk of taking out those capacities will be extremely high. It's like India and Pakistan, they kept talking about we have the bomb, we don't have the bomb. Once they produce 20 bombs each, then we can do, at the same time, we couldn't do anything. So that would be my reasoning with regard to the Iranian issue.
Yes, do you think social media will have like a positive or lasting effect after the events that happened there?
Social media, that's an extremely important question. I've been underlining. I think social media is going to win the day in the region and beyond. Unfortunately, I don't have the physical time to talk. This would be a one lecture, but social media is changing the map of the Middle East. That's why you see me, despite all the bad news that I serve, and many lawmakers are saying, oh, no more Phares in Congress. I am very confident of the waves I see coming after, because I'm reading what those social media are doing. They're connecting the biggest web and cobweb of those civil societies ever seen before. Meaning, even if after the authoritarians, you're going to see other type of authoritarians, that's in this case the Ikhwan in Egypt or others, those will be faced by Facebookers as well and younger generations. It's unreversible anymore.
Doctor, let me ask you something. How long will the military stand by killing their own family members before they turn to the regime and say, you know what, I'm not going to kill more of my people? You got to step down, because you got to think they're killing their own people. So
in Syria, you mean?
Exactly. They're burning up rice, because it might happen that a general might kill one of his sons and daughters, and then he's like, all right, I'm done.
Well, my friend, you've just put your finger on the actual wound. That's what's happening as we speak. The increasing number of rebels in the so-called FSA, Free Syria Army, inside Syria, as we speak right now, those numbers are coming as a result precisely of what you said. The regular units of any army, if not fully indoctrinated and fully paid, any regular army has a range after which it cannot last. If the killings of civilians continue, any army will break. And that responds to the previous question that I was handling. There is a point in Syria where the army is going to break. I am not sure if the army is going to shift, as would be the case in Egypt and Libya, because it's an army that is composed from different ethnic and religious groups. But eventually it will break. You're right.
Yes, sir. What would be your advice to the administration to stop the struggling of the people in Syria?
In Syria?
Yes.
Man, that's very difficult to give it now. But nevertheless, first of all, we need to change our understanding of what's happening and realizing that we are behind, we need to catch up quick. We have to be modest in accepting that an intervention, a better policy should have been done 6-7 months ago. So there is a gap, we need to go very fast in closing that gap. Number one recommendation would be, as the gentleman has mentioned, giving visibility to the command of the Free Syria Army and bringing them to the international community. Because remember, we only started, our public decided that they would go into action and help in Libya only when we saw those people coming to here. They briefed, they testified, in Brussels and elsewhere. We don't see the same in Syria. We talk about it as an opaque, very unclear situation. We're going to arm the opposition. We don't know who the opposition is. So first of all, identify. It's like having a General de Gaulle somewhere with a free government, so we could talk with them and sit down and make sure that when they come to power, if they do, they're going to have a democracy and freedom, because we don't want to end up removing Assad and bringing Assad too. We want to make sure that it's not going to happen. Number two, civil society in Syria basically is in need of logistics, is in need of radio broadcasts, is in need of a variety of humanitarian support. We need to organize that. It does not simply exist because we don't have a policy with that. Three, we need to make sure that those who are supporting the Assad regime across the borders are told that if you continue that support to the regime, then we'll support your opposition. So that should be a crafting of a policy with regard to Iran and with regard to Lebanon. If you're going to intervene in aiding the regime and oppressing the people, we will then support your own opposition. So a different architecture, very fast, could deliver some results.
What would you say the incentive for Russia to back up Iran at this time is? Other than monetary trade, what other things to back it up?
Why is Russia supporting the Iranians in general, the Iran regime, of course, and the Syrian regime in particular in this case? An array of things. It's like a layer cake. You have number one, the fact that the leadership in Russia believes in a multipolar, actually bipolar world. They don't like the idea that the United States is the monopolar. So you have that one down. Number two, you just mentioned that it's the importance of those markets to sell weapons, and they have a very large industrial military network that wants to export weapons. And it's not just to Iran and to Syria, because Iran and Syria are the model, but behind them you have a lot of many other countries. If they see that those weapons are working there, they would go and buy more of those. And thirdly, there is another hidden reason which not only experts can understand, and Russians do not talk about it. Russia has domestic problems, including uprisings. You know, where are those areas? Chechnya, Dagestan, where they have Islamist uprisings, Sunni Islamist uprisings. Somehow they believe that if the Syrian regime, which is secular by the way, it's an authoritarian but secular socialist, if it goes down, then the force which is going to replace it is going to be the Muslim Brotherhood or Islamists. Their fear is that the new regime is going to support the secession in Russia, and that will be catastrophic for them. So we have to educate the Russians that if you help on Syria and Iran, we may not necessarily have, religious fundamentalists. We could have both of us a coalition of secular forces or moderate forces taking over. That's another crafting we need to.
Can I ask a question?
Professor, please.
No, mainly since it's about the cause for this session, the American cause, and making sure whom we are going to support, mainly protecting our principles, but not telling the others, follow this principle, you have your choice. But we are facing a dilemma in the Middle East. Bahrain and Syria, Bahrain and Egypt, Bahrain and the others. So mainly, still, what kind of choices you are going to go ahead and tell them, while some of them mainly accuse us of double standard. In Bahrain, we listened to Saudi Arabia, we didn't mention something. And in Egypt, we said, no, listen, we are going to have an umbrella over you. The army is not going to go ahead and suppress you. So really, what kind of message you are sending? If you are in this position, what you are going to say?
Excellent. Dear colleague, the reason for why we are in this position, I work with Robert all the time, and I advise and he advises me to advise. So he's part of the game. Don't believe he doesn't know, the whole thing. What we have missed is the fact that we have not identified and partnered with democracy forces as the real partner. We want to spend our money on people we actually believe are going to come in the direction that is in cahoots with our direction. I mean, we can do that. We have a free choice here. So we have, if I may use the term, not well served by our expertise. Now I count myself, all of us in the field. We have not really served our government in good expertise in explaining that we have more choices than exist. The choices now are, as you said, Bahrain or Syria. Either those bad guys or the other bad, worse guys. So we have not worked on a partnership with civil society forces. When those civil society forces rose in Egypt, I can guarantee you, from the position I'm in right now, we never heard of them. We were not working with them. The tens of thousands of youth, don't believe anybody will tell you otherwise, are people who on their own, on their Facebook, with their own reading, they've done the revolution. We spend millions of dollars on forces and NGOs that were not efficient in this business. So what we need to do is, first of all, because we have free choice, is to identify and work with civil society forces, even if they are the weakest element. It's fine. Because the weakest element, if you work with them, they strongly and surely become the strongest element. Let me give you the example of Bahrain, which is the most complicated. All right, Bahrain, small island, a lot of money. It has a small segment of Sunni Arabs who control the regime, and a large element of Shia Arabs who feel that they are suppressed. So the criticism to the United States, level to the United States, is that we are backing the regime. We're not really giving rights to the Shia majority who are poor, because the Saudis are our allies, and the Saudis are concerned that if the Shia will take over from the Sunni, the Iranians will have that influence. So this is the dilemma. If we go with civil society right now, I'm not yet giving you my opinion. If we go with the Shia right now, this means we'll be with democracy, but this will mean that Iran will take over, and the Saudis won't be happy, and the Saudis are giving us oil. That's where the New York Times article will stop. But what is not said, what bloggers will tell you, is that nothing is that uniform. So it's not the whole Shia versus the whole Sunni. The Sunni is a pyramid that has a top, but has also middle class. And it has middle class that we can work with. And the Shia, goodness, there are two kinds. You have those who are civil society NGOs, and then you have those who are pro-Iranian Hezbollah people. So why aren't we able to make a distinction? If we have good engineering, we say, we want to sit down and work with the moderate Shia civil society NGOs and bring from the other side their companions from the Sunni community, and both of them will become the force of change we can work with. That way the Saudis are not nervous because the pro-Iranian element is out, and on the other hand we'll be pushing for democracy, and we could put pressure on the regime to give more and more constitutional reform, the same way we've done it in Morocco. Did you hear about massive bloodshed in Morocco? No. And yet the king and the constitution in Morocco have changed over the past year significantly, and there's an Islamist cabinet in Morocco, and yet we're not hearing about a lot of trouble. So it's engineering in Washington. Would you join us in Washington if we do some engineering on that?
Walid, what is our vital interest in the region? Is it to spread democracy or to extract resources that are essential to our economy?
That's a big one. Let's run a referendum here. I think it's not contradictory. I think these are different dimensions, not exclusive one of the other. Meaning, we will have to continue as long as we don't have alternative to have those resources at a decent price, but not at the price of siding with repression against democracy. So we need an engineering that would leave us with the following. The best guarantee for us to maintain those resources coming to us is to increase our support to democracy so that civil society based on conviction and not on coercion will be trading with us. So I am among those who feel that the best guarantee for the future in the Middle East is to work with those forces, mainly the younger generations, that would deal with us as the Europeans are or Latin Americans are. Meaning we could have a lot of problems with them, but not existential ones, as we may have it with authoritarians who one day are our friend and next day are our dire enemies.
I knew you were going to say that. I just wanted the students to hear from the
Okay.
experts. Yes, sir.
Ma'am, it's okay.
Ma'am.
Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry.
As you mentioned earlier, you found out in the 90s that Americans aren't too involved with international affairs. What do you say to a majority of Americans that feel that we shouldn't even be meddling in the Middle East? Unfortunately, you get a lot of ignorant answers of we should just bomb them all. But this is our mentality. So what is, if you could consolidate an answer for a majority of Americans that feel we shouldn't even be here?
As an immigrant scholar, that's different from being born here and being raised in the same culture. I had to deal with understanding that, from the classroom into the courtroom, into the newsroom, all the rooms, that yes, we have this cultural issue in the United States between a large segment of our population that think that it would be a better idea not to get involved anywhere else, which is very legitimate and logical. If planet Earth was what they think it is, then yes, I would be among those. I'd like to go to Colorado and ski all year long, or try to find a better job. If planet Earth was different. The problem is we are dealing with an international society that commands us to be aware of what's going on and make those choices. The time of we're protected by two oceans is gone. because economically speaking, politically speaking, and other ways speaking, we are all interconnected. On the other hand, the other extreme that says, oh, keep bombing till we get our interests, confirmed, is also over. We can't do that. So my modest view is that we need to share with civil societies elsewhere who see eye to eye with us. Not the entire civil society, but segments who also in their society are saying, we'd better be at peace and stability and trade and democracy and freedom. If we can find those actors and work with them as a whole, as an international society, I think we could be in a better position than isolating ourselves and waiting for the planet to change in different directions, where we'll have to re-engage later at a higher price.
Bob, did you have a question? Did you have anything? Yeah, okay.
Just to kind of add up to that question.
Speak up just a little bit so we can pick it up on the mic.
Just to add up to that question, what would you say that we could do as individuals or as students to tackle these issues going on?
What can we do as students? Well, that has been my life subject here at FAU and before, and even now I'm teaching in DC. I can't repeat enough that the classroom, and this is not education propaganda, this is reality. The classroom, an American classroom, any classroom, is crucial. I'm the product of the classroom. He is, you are, and you'll be next in the other place, and others will come in. And I often go to high schools and middle schools and engage with younger and younger to see how the mind is traveling, how it's been educated. First of all, it's to get information, as much information as you can. Second is when that goes to your direct interest. When you write a paper, a research paper, make sure to choose the one that you are really engaged in, that you like and you know that you're going to push, and follow. That piece of paper, that piece of research may become a line of interest for you in the future. And third, really have activities in your post or off classroom regular mandate, which is forming those specialized student organizations that are not so general, very specific. Take a cause, follow the cause. It could be the American cause, or cause of freedom. It could be contradictive causes, but try to make more than the classroom in terms of these years where you are as undergrad or grad.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, we've been talking, we can talk about so many different American interests abroad, political interests, economic interests, so-called, but I think as a whole, we're also concerned with our foreign policy, particularly in a post-9/11 world. How is our image in the world over there? We don't want to see some of these folks turn into terrorists, and things like that, and by opening up those societies, we have a desire to see human rights and things like that, but I know we've also seen some images of, Al-Qaeda has maybe increased in some of those countries now that, the dictator is gone or something like that. So how is America's image in some of those different Middle East societies going to be reactive to terrorism?
I worked on the issue of strategic communications, with people in government and private sector for the last direct 10 years now, and before that, meaning about the image of the United States. I appear in the Arab media every day, multiple times. So I have learned a lot. That broke the myth that has been established that there is a uniform world out there and they react in the same way to everything we do. This is dead for me. It's as diverse as we are, and each one has an agenda. This is a very, it's a world formed of multiple nations, not one nation and the world, as some would want us to think. So, with regard to America, the framing of the image of America is done either by what we do or by what we don't. When some would paint that these societies are anti-American because 1, 2, 3, just think of one thing. Who's putting this 1, 2, 3? You think every kid, every person who's demonstrating or becoming a jihadist is a PhD in international relations and they're gonna... No, there is a war room and there is a war of ideas, and people are trying to frame the others as we frame them. So the United States, in the last 10 years at least, in this confrontation, I think had a failure in framing exactly what their ideas, what the ideas of its people were. That's where we failed. On the other hand, there was a war of ideas in the greater Middle East and in the Arab and Muslim world between various forces. The jihadists are a force. They have huge billions of dollars and petrodollars and airwaves. And then the secular forces and the youth and the minorities. we have not looked at the Middle East as what I call it a tabbouleh salad, meaning pieces of everything. We've looked at it as one uniform tableau, and then we said either white and black, and there is nothing in between. So I think here we need to change, to start changing, to be more nuanced, to understand the Middle East in the same way we understand Europe. We're good at Europe. We know what's going on. We're also good at Latin America. Probably a little bit more on Africa, but we're not that good on understanding the variety of identities in the Middle East.
Okay, time for one more question, Paul.
You talk about a war, I guess in the last couple of days, some Israeli diplomats have been attacked, one in India, and I don't know what the other one was, and there's been some warnings about Iran going after some targets here in the United States based upon the sanctions and what we're doing against them, and the fact that we killed, or whoever is killed on our side, their nuclear scientists. I mean, do you see, it obviously has expanded in the last couple of days, but do you see that getting worse and potentially spreading to our shores?
Because of what you just mentioned, that it has worsened and escalated. So when you do a projection and you see something escalating, my answer would be, do I see forces to de-escalate it? No. So it's going to continue to escalate for the simple reason that the positioning of forces is like a naval battle. If you continue to position in an aggressive way against each other, you're going to end up clashing somewhere. The Iranian regime, basically, as I said earlier, is a very calculating force. They would like to confront us short of the clash. Meaning in the Hormuz Strait, they are now deploying, but they're not actually triggering. They said, you're not going to get your carrier in. We did get the carrier in and didn't do anything. At the same time, they try in Iraq to assassinate a number of anti-Iranians. And they are, yes, of course, training themselves to come through Mexico, through Canada, and to position themselves here. We got one attempt against the Saudi embassy a few months from now. So there is a warmer Cold War between us and that other part of the Iranian-led coalition. Would that lead to, at one point, them going full-fledged against us? I think the way they measure it is also rational, and we could detect that. If they feel that we're going to bring down their regime, they will unleash everything they have under their hands. So if we are moving in that direction, they're going to move in the same direction. That's why unless we partner with the Iranian people to actually reduce or change that regime, we are heading towards that confrontation, unfortunately.
Well, we'll take one more. Okay.
Doctor, do you foresee our nation going in the transition from a more militaristic point of view into a more globalized, comprehensive, international relations with all the countries? And the second part of that question would be, will that affect us as a nation?
Here at home?
Yes.
Let me make it as simple as I can, since it's the last question. I see that those trends are being debated right now, and those trends will be determined by the developments abroad, meaning we are kind of reacting to what's happening abroad. And if the gentleman just now asked the question is right on his analysis, and we are heading towards a confrontation over oil in Iran and the nukes, then we are going certainly to use our military in the next few months, into 6 months probably. If there is an Arab Spring in Iran or an Iranian Spring that would reduce the influence of those regimes, that would give us the impetus not to expand but actually partner with those civil societies. So the equation is, the more we partner with civil societies, the less we need military, but we will still have to keep enough military just in case those changes will not occur in the direction that we like. And with this, I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.